Welcome to the Bruton Knowles Landmark Podcast, where we explore the key dynamics shaping the property sector and beyond, with insights from those working at the heart of the UK's built environment. Today, we're confronting one of those most pressing issues facing our industry and country, the housing crisis. With a new government in place, a pledge to build 1.5 million homes and 39 billion committed to affordable housing, the ambition is clear. But is it achievable? I'm James Bailey, Managing Partner here at Bruton Knowles, and I'm joined by my colleague and fellow land and development specialist, Guy Emerson. Together we'll be unpacking the numbers, the policy direction, and the reality on the ground, from planning gridlock and skilled labour shortages to the sheer scale of delivery required. Is this the dawn of a new era for UK housing, or just another set of headlines without the horsepower to follow through? Let's get into it. Okay, so we're now circling around the subject which is all close to our hearts, being as we all live in a house or know somebody that does. And it's a subject that we've discussed in previous podcasts and said that we would come back to. I think the starting point, Guy, is probably to understand where we are currently in terms of the numbers of supplied new houses.
Okay, James, thanks. So as we know, Labour support provision of 1.5 million net new dwellings in England, and their important emphasis then net new, and they're in England, not UK, over the next Parliament. So, broadly speaking, that's 300,000 per annum, which is similar to the previous government, who initially sought 300,000 houses per annum, but then revised that to 1 million over the whole Parliament and eventually seemed to abandon the target altogether. This level of building, of course, it's never happened before, other than perhaps in the 1960s when there were more than 300,000 housing starts, but there were also a lot of demolitions, slum clearance mainly, I think. So that's less than 300,000 in terms of net new dwellings. The low point for delivery was in the 1990s, where the numbers struggled to hit 150,000. It's risen and it's fallen since. Unfortunately, we're not off to a great start. With the Office for Budget Responsibility, they're sort of projecting 1.3 million across the period. In the UK, though, not just England. So less than that in England. And, we've seen some indications that even the government aren't holding steadfast to that figure because they admit it's now going to be tough to deliver these types of numbers. There's lots of research on it. The Home Builders Federation, they do a quarterly housing pipeline report, and they suggest that the number of residential planning approvals was down quite significantly, actually 32% on the last year. That's the lowest since 2012. And of course, that doesn't bode very well for numbers, does it? But I think the more telling, the more interesting stat is related to EPC registration data, so energy performance certificates, because potentially that's the most up-to-date source of new houses. So that data suggests that across the UK, most regions have seen a lot lower house building levels in the past year than they had done in the previous 12 months. And the figures point to something like, just about 185,000 completions in the year to the 15th of June. So, that alone suggests that we're a long way off.
It might be the case, I think, whatever statistic you look at, the government must be realising that they are some distance away from where they need to be.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look at the past figures, so peak delivery was about 250,000 in 2019. Some people blame that on the fact that the mandatory house building targets were scrapped in 2022, which of course have now been, they've been reinstated with some gusto, haven't they? So in 2022-23, there were about 210,000 completions. In 23-24, there were a little under 200,000 completions. And if the EPC figures are to be believed, we're well under that. So it's a definite downward trend that it's just going to need massive interventions to turn that around.
Yeah, and I suppose it's the interventions that we'll come on to later. But in truth, you said it right at the outset, it's not a great starting point, is it? The landscape isn't as good as it could be in order to hit these 300,000 per annum numbers. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't realise that it's the net figure. So effectively, you have to take into account the fact that, if you're doing a brownfield site where you're demolishing older units or flats and stuff, then that comes off that number. It's actually new build numbers that are coming into the market. Just makes it more challenging for the government to hit those numbers. But clearly, historically, as a country, we've struggled to hit what I would describe as consistent numbers anyway on an annual basis, which is borne out by the data when you look back over time. Yes, there's reasons for it, but the fact is there just isn't a consistent supply of new houses in the UK going back over time.
No, and I think 300,000 was always a bold vision, and kudos for that, really. And I don't think it should surprise anyone that year one doesn't hit the 5-year average. No. I don't think we can expect that. And as you say, I'm sure we'll look at some of the interventions that would help that. But it does leave a uphill battle for the next 4 years, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's difficult to criticise anyone for coming up with targets and some actions around them, I suppose, in the cold light of day. And it's just how realistic those are. Are we setting people up for failure? Is it going to have a counterintuitive effect because people are just going to say, well, we're never going to get there? Is it too much of a stretch? I think is kind of where I'm coming from. But let's just look at what those new targets mean then in terms of the key components within the sector. So, you might argue that developers don't need much incentive to build houses because that's their job and that's what they're in business for. Should we start with the perspective of local authorities? Because I think that's a place where there's a lot of pressure. There's under-resourcing, particularly in planning teams and planning departments, particularly from an experience point of view, in terms of looking at complex, large-scale planning applications for residential development. Are these figures supposed to be a target for local authorities to force them to provide more consents for housing?
Yeah, local authorities, they've now got mandatory housing targets again, whether they want them or not. And of course, a lot don't, which are much higher than they were before for almost all parts of the country, except London, I guess. And with that comes almost inevitable local objection until everyone's on board with the fact that we need to provide more houses. And that, it's always been a complex interrelationship of planning officer recommendations, local councillors, local residents, the whole community engagement. They're going to have to deal with it. And I think that the government's sort of, if you like, forcing numbers on the local authorities, mainly to just put back in place the mandatory requirements that were there before 2022, to give the incentive that says, these have got to be delivered. And if you don't deliver them, we will. And, they have got a number of tools in their toolbox to help them move along that line. And I think local authorities have now got a requirement to overhaul their local plans, for example, so they can start planning for these numbers. And, really importantly, there's a very clear expectation from the government that these local plans to take 2.5 years, not the average of 7 years that it's taken in the past. Now, there's going to need to be support for that because there's a lot of work that goes into a local plan. But it's definitely pointing people in the right direction. And I think we've got, one that I would really interested to see how it plays out is this promise of more streamlined planning committees to try and address the uncertainty that comes with a planning committee and the delays in the approval process. We all know how long it can take from the submission of an application to the granting of that application. So I think that's going to help. I'll be interested to see how this national scheme of delegation, as they call it, works, which is basically where if a proposal complies with local development plans, then they can bypass the committee entirely. I suspect that's going to be, it won't be welcomed by all.
No, it's fine unless there's lots of objections, isn't there? I think one of the issues at local level is that, how can we put it politely, lots of housing sites aren't particularly welcome because there's a general view that you can build them somewhere else, but I don't want them building next to me. Not all of it is material in terms of consideration, but people do like to object to housing schemes, which the delays around planning in itself, for those listeners that don't quite understand the sort of the nature of these larger scale housing application it's true, guys, isn't it, that they can go into a local authority and then there'll be various iterations, changes, amendments, additional reports. And the delays go, they're in years, not months.
Yeah. I mean, it can take 10 years from inception to delivery quite easily on some of these large schemes. But they are very complicated, and there's a raft of obligations and policies, and particularly environmental, that need to be thought through and thought of. So anything that can be done that reduces that time frame is going to be a good thing. Again, slightly mixing the local authority with the developer standpoint. We've got powers like, the use of compulsory purchase orders if land isn't cancelled, which is a really interesting thing.
It is.
And something that won't be welcomed by a lot of people. And personally, I sort of question where the funding and the resources is going to come from, if that's going to be used in anything other than very small numbers. But it's always there as a threat.
Yeah.
But as you sort of indicated earlier on, generally speaking, landowners and developers want this land to come through. If they want to sell the land, they want to build the houses. It's difficult to know where a compulsory purchase order is going to assist in anything other than areas where viability is an enormous challenge and land isn't coming forward, or there's a particular issue that is preventing a cycling forward.
Yeah, because the theory is it unlocks things that have been in play for a very, very long time. But as you say, developers earn their living by developing sites out. So I suppose the only thing you could say is large-scale developers have a hierarchy, and depends where sites sit within that hierarchy. But you can be quite careful with CPO, really. It, used well, it's a great tool. But I know for a fact that lots of local authorities have limited CPO experience and skills themselves. So that might be an additional factor. And certainly our CPO team is probably half its client base is assisting local authorities to deliver CPO schemes. Yeah, it'll be interesting how it plays out. I mean, certainly the first local authority that presses a button on it and uses it will be really interesting, I think.
I think it's also important to just touch upon something that's in this toolbox that I talk about is the introduction of the grey belt designation. And in terms of a massive oversimplification of the issue, that's land that is in the green belt that's either previously developed land or is land that doesn't really contribute to the purpose of the green belt designation in the first place. And that's going to be important to release land to put these additional numbers on. And there are already consents coming through, both at the local level and at appeal, on this grey land basis. So that's encouraging to see. And I think that could be a real answer to some of these housing numbers.
Yeah, I suppose for lots of people, grey belt is something new. I mean, most people have certainly heard of the green belt and certainly heard of brownfield sites, but grey belt is something pretty new. And is it something that reflects the fact that it's less desirable green belt land, not so picturesque, perhaps?
Yeah. Well, I think it's land that isn't contributing towards the purposes that the wider area of green belt was designated. There's lots of rules and there's lots of regulations around it, but just the very fact that there's recognition that some green belt isn't as good as the other is quite a step forward.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Also, just focusing on the tools that are available. There is more funding for planning for new planning officers, but frankly, it's just not enough. It's £4.5 million, I think, and that's meant to help towards funding 300 planning officers. But there are 324 local planning authorities in England.
Yes, not even one each, isn't?
No, and if you do the numbers, it's only £15,000 a head.
It sounds like someone's going to have a job share there.
Yeah. Well, that might cover the recruitment costs, but it doesn't do a lot more. It just takes an incredibly long time. These aren't planning officers who are sitting at home thinking, "What am I going to do next week?" They're going to have to come through the system, and dealing with a large and complex case, as you said, takes a lot of skill and a lot of experience.
And experience, yeah. I think that's one of the issues. It's. I mean, as a chartered surveyor, we know the time lag from passing your degree to qualifying, etc. It's a 6-year journey, and I think with planning officers, to become fully qualified as a planning officer, great. That's going to take sort of 4 or 5 years, but you're going to be a very inexperienced planning officer. And I think what most local authorities are struggling to deal with is two things: one, volume, and the fact that the complex planning applications are in the system for a very, very long time. So I think the reality is it's a good idea. I don't think anyone can criticise the government for coming up with it. I just think the reality is it's probably not going to deliver anything in the life of this Parliament.
No. And of course, there's the time lag. And I think that applies to a lot of these things. The time lag means, and it's been proven so far, that we won't hit the numbers in year one. We probably won't hit them in year two, but there's more prospect further down the line.
Yeah, and I think the other issue, just closing off on planning officers, is I think that we've seen over the years being in private practice is that people qualify going through local authorities because it's a good learning place to be, but they don't stop terribly long because they then go into private practice, mostly into planning consultancies or large organisations with a large planning team. And the lure of, I suppose, an increased package or broader work with greater resources and support from colleagues is probably going to be as attractive in 5 years' time as it's been this year and 5 years before. That's a slight issue. It's how many of those 300 new planning officers are you going to be able to retain once they're qualified over a 3 to 5 year period? That's a real challenge for them, because that is around a couple of things. That's around not just your package, what are you being paid, etc., but what's your working environment? Are you going to be massively stressed because there's hardly any of you in the planning team? Because that is a reason why people leave, because they want to join organisations where there's better support. So it's something that it's not just about funding now, it's about funding continuing onwards to bolster up planning teams to make sure that they're fit for purpose.
Totally agree. I think the last thing in my toolbox that's going to help is the question around the social housing sector. And, there's been big and positive news on that recently.
Yeah.
And of course, there should be, because the lack of social housing is a real issue. It's a real crisis. It needs addressing. There are some horrifying statistics, aren't there?
Yeah, just to give everyone the headlines, the new government's committed 39 billion over a 10-year programme for affordable homes. Sounds a big number, but it is over 10 years.
Yeah, it is over 10 years, but that 10-year point is important, as I'll sort of come to. So that money is there to try and build 30,000 new affordable homes a year over the next 10 years.
Right.
And that's as part of the 300,000 that we've spoken about earlier. And so it won't escape you that that's 10%, the total. And the real focus of this funding is on providing social rent tenure. So social rent is lower per week than affordable rent, and it's the most affordable form of social housing. So they're looking to provide 18,000 of the 30,000 annually, which is 60%. And that's a massive increase on the previous programme, which I think saw about 8,000 social rent units delivered towards the end. So very significant increase. It's good news at one level. If you're a developer or a landowner or a planning authority struggling with viability, it's not so good, because the lower value end of the affordable housing spectrum is more difficult to deliver. So, as you said, to fund that, there is 39 billion. And that comes with a second piece, which is a 10-year rent settlement. Both of these are really positive news for the whole sector, but it had to be, frankly, because, housing associations, registered providers, they were more or less out of the market for new build affordable units delivered through Section 106 agreements as part of a larger scheme, because they were focusing their limited funds elsewhere.
Right.
And that created and has continued to create tremendous strain on delivery of both affordable and market housing, because, most planning permissions say you can only deliver X market units before you deliver Y affordable units. And if there's no one to acquire those Y affordable units, you've got a problem.
Yep.
You've got a logjam. So this announcement is good. It's great news. And you can compare it to the last affordable housing programme funding, which was 12.3 billion over 5 years.
Right.
21 to 26. And so, double that up, 24.6 over 10. So it is a significant increase when you get to 39. And the last programme had sort of hoped to deliver 180,000 affordable homes, but never did. And the target revised to about 100, 110, 120 or so last year. But the real importance of the deal is that it is securing funding for 10 years, not the normal 5 years. And that brings much, much more certainty and stability into the sector, particularly when you couple it with this 10-year settlement on social rent levels, which basically means that the housing associations know that they're allowed to increase rent by inflation plus 1% per annum. That's consumer price inflation, which again, greater certainty for the provider, greater certainty for the funder, greater certainty for the investor to just allow them to invest and plan for the future. So, yeah, that's really positive news.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth saying that the UK does seem to suffer historically, probably presently, from just not being able to plan over a 10-year period. It's too much short-term view in terms of sort of policies and planning. So I think it's to be welcomed that, as you say, 10 years provides greater certainty, more stability, and ultimately it is looking beyond the life of the existing parliament to deliver a lot of this. I think, the government's to be commended in the sense that they are looking beyond the next parliament, because it's going to take probably up to 10 years to get ourselves into a position where we are more regularly building the right level of housing for a growing population and a changing population as well.
So, that toolkit I keep talking about has got some pretty innovative tools in it, and it bodes well for the future. It's just going to take time.
So that's all the positive stuff. I suppose really what we should now turn towards is, so there's the policies, that's the objectives. There are going to be some barriers on the ground to achieving this around, we've discussed already, planning resource, planning authorities' ability to deal with large-scale applications. But, labour and skills gap is something that keeps coming to the fore across the UK in quite a number of key industries, and house building is no different whatsoever. And there are some sort of quite worrying statistics out there. So the City and Guilds organisation has stated that 76% of construction firms consulted are struggling to recruit the right skilled person they need. An overwhelming 84% of those surveyed agreed that the industry is grappling with critical skills shortages. So, and that really sounds like it's at two levels. It's at skilled and non-skilled in terms of the construction sector, because you always have a blend of the two in terms of highly skilled people and then not so skilled individuals. But clearly, you can't deliver these numbers without the boots on the ground to actually physically build the houses, to do the groundwork, to do the landscaping, whatever.
Yeah, well, I think that's perfectly right. I think the Home Builders Federation really brought it to life when they said they sort of estimated earlier on that they're going to need 25,000 additional bricklayers, 3,000 additional plumbers, 4,000 plasterers, 10,000 carpenters, and so on. And it is a simple case that if you're going to build more houses, you're going to need more people to do it. And I think there's another estimate that says you need nearly 240,000 extra workers by 2029 to meet these targets. And that is just a huge number, And of course, that needs vision, it needs training and upskilling, and it needs collaboration with the education sector, with the industry, with the government. But it's going to take time. So there's going to be a lag, and that's going to affect delivery.
Yeah, and the difficulty is you have to blend newer members into wider construction teams. It's got to be a blend of experience and not quite so experienced. So again, that's a time lag factor. But you're right, that 240,000 workers by 2029, which the Construction Industry Training Board looked at, that's a significant number. Big question is post-Brexit. Is that a number that can be delivered from within the UK, or is the government going to have to grapple with the reality that they're going to have to look at relaxing some of the guidance around people coming from abroad to work in the UK? It's difficult to turn the tap on, but positive immigration does enable you to do that. And as we know, certainly from the construction sector and the house building sector, Brexit did damage it in terms of lots of people going back to Eastern Europe that were highly skilled and highly trained professionals in the construction sector.
Yeah, highly valuable. Yeah, no, I agree. You can't help but wonder that, that is going to have to be part of the matrix to deliver these sorts of numbers. But, to be fair, the government are on it, though. They have launched this construction skills mission board, which is a bit of a mouthful, but they've launched that, given it £600 million worth of funding, in the hope that that can create 60,000 new jobs. It's only 10,000 a person, isn't it? But
yeah,
it's hoped that that's going to be achieved through things like placements, apprenticeships, extra construction courses, even a number of new excellent colleges, as they phrase them. So the problem, it's recognised, but there's a big divergence between 60,000 and 240,000, and there's no short fix. I think that's it's a real barrier.
No, it is, and it's probably one that sits slightly below the surface, isn't it? That really it's left ultimately to the construction companies themselves to grapple with, because they're the people that need the resource, whether it's full-time employed resource or whether it's people that are employed on a subcontracting basis. But clearly the sector itself, as we know even anecdotally, dealing in properties we do, it is very difficult to get roofers, very difficult to get plasterers in a timely manner that fits with a construction programme, because that's the other issue. Certainly from the bank valuation work that we do, supporting development schemes, it is an issue. It's a real issue for developers. It adds time, which adds cost. That delay is costly for everybody involved. So in order to drive efficiencies around this delivery, you've got to have a well-trained workforce in the right numbers to deliver it. So yeah, I think it's a big concern, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just, if you want a new bathroom in your house, it'll take you 6 to 8 months to get someone to turn up. And that's just indicative of the problem at a very minor level, and multiply that up to trying to build 300,000 houses. Well, you can see the scale of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's something that's clearly in front of us, and something that the government will probably have to keep committing time, energy, and funding to. But it's a good initiative. I think traditionally the trades have always been a good place for people. They probably need to sort of blow their trumpets a bit more with careers fairs, and I think certainly with apprenticeships. I mean, certainly the apprenticeships that we've used, people coming to our business, it's been a great alternative to going to university and amassing a debt the size of a third world country on a personal basis. So I think apprenticeships are a great way of training skilled and semi-skilled people. So I think government probably needs to put more money into that, because I think there's plenty of companies out there that are prepared to support it. Just need to make sure that the numbers add up. But it's a great way of blending practical experience with learning what you need to learn academically. So I suppose what we need to reflect on at this point is whether the current ambition is political optics or there's a practical reality behind it. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we've certainly alluded to, it's political at the moment in terms of its optics, definitely. And it's really when those practical issues start to bear fruit, isn't it? I think we've probably both said that it's not likely to be in the next 3 years or 4 years. So,
but I think that's right.
But thereafter, effectively, you've got to have this stream of planning officers, more skilled people, a change in emphasis, the way planning authorities approach. Because, I mean, generally, the key issues for the house builders, or the main difficulty is still getting planning permission that makes for a viable development. I think for those that are listening that aren't particularly in the residential housing sector and construction sector, it's that developers will only develop at a certain level of profit that is a return for the risk of what they've been doing for many years in terms of strategic land or option agreements. It's not just a matter of building out every single site. Sites have to work financially. I think there's quite a lot of ignorance around that in the sort of wider general public, and understanding of, well, how does it work? Do you simply not just find a site, agree a price with the landowner and get your planning and build? The answer is you don't.
Yeah, I mean, it is complex, and I think there is a lot of misunderstanding out there. At a very base level, it's in no developer's interest to buy a site and leave it. Yes, they will. They'll have return on capital employed considerations. They'll have to, phase the sites according to their workforce at the particular time, for example. I think half the problem is that everyone thinks that developers make enormous amounts of money, and some of these companies do make enormous amount of money, but they are building an enormous number of houses. They are taking enormous risks. They're shelling out a lot of money in advance before they start getting returns. I think it's slightly unfortunate, but I just don't believe that that's the problem, really.
No, and it's also fair to say that they're gaining huge economies of scale, aren't they? The big national house builders, in terms of, simply purchasing materials, they're driving it to a much more efficient conclusion than a smaller developer that just can't achieve those economies of scale.
No, they can't. And of course, that slightly brings in a bit of a two-tier market. Many of the large national house builders don't look at small sites any longer for that reason. 100 is probably the minimum, 100 units, 200 is preferred, and 2,000 is even better if they can get the right terms. They're facing quite a lot of issues at the moment, and I'm not trying to play the violin for them, but there are a number of things coming through that it is going to impact. So we've got the building safety levy, for example, on all new build units. That's going to have quite a big impact. We've recently had rates for this levy published for all the local authorities, and it's somewhere between £7 and £46, I think, per square metre for previously developed land, and double that for non-previously developed land. And that's a significant sum that's going to impact on risk. It'll impact on cash flow, and it'll impact on viability. No one's saying it's a bad idea. It's just that's the consequence. The same thing applies really for the future homes and building standards that are coming in. Great idea, of course, but it's going to cost roughly £5,000 or more per dwelling to achieve. And taken together, they could be quite a significant barrier to delivery.
Yeah, and ultimately, in the wider scheme of things, it actually pushes the price of the house up for members of the general public to buy them ultimately.
Yeah, what it will push up is the cost of building it. And what that should do is decrease the value of the land upon which it's built. I think part of the issue is that with some of the environmental improvements, which are absolutely essential, but people aren't really paying more for them. So from that perspective, house prices aren't going up to reflect the additional cost, particularly. But of course, it's achieving a great goal. And I think one other thing, just around the barriers, as going back slightly, is there are great environmental policies and directives, and no one's saying they're wrong, but there are 160,000 consented houses blocked on issues relating to neutrality, for example. So we've got to unblock that.
Yes.
Somehow to release 160,000 houses that are already ready to be built. And I suppose it just illustrates that this is an enormous problem. There are lots of issues, lots of opportunities. There is no easy fix, is there?
No, there doesn't appear to be. And the problem is it's multi-layered and multifaceted. I think that's one of the issues. The truth around the whole process of building houses and getting through the planning system is it's incredibly bureaucratic, and it's impacted upon by a lot of legislation, all for the right reasons, you can argue, in terms of legislation. But what it does do is mean there isn't a simplified route towards it. I know government's starting to sort of try and do that through identifying key sites, and there's the threat of CPO and that sort of stuff. But really, if you stood back from it and said, if you just simplified it in terms of getting the planning, that would surely unlock more sites, because it would cost developers less. There'd be less resistance in terms of time. But of course, you've got the issues of local people not wanting houses built in the field that they look at, or they walk past, or they walk through. It's kind of, it can be a bit circular if you're not careful. So I suppose the question is, has government done enough to unlock it in a way that is going to accelerate applications getting through the system?
I don't think I'm the only one who thinks that these targets aren't going to be hit, but at least the government have laid the groundwork for increasing output, and the benefits of that are going to flow through, even if it's going to take a bit longer than we all thought. It's difficult to think, other than more money, it's difficult to think what other policies are strictly necessary. More money for first-time buyer help would assist, but until you fix the planning officer resource problem, until you fix the construction worker resource problem, it's a bit, it's a bit cart before the horse, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely things they can do to accelerate things once it's in a position to be accelerated. Definitely, yeah, because you can tweak stamp duty, you can do help to buy, etc. And I think that's right. You can mobilise quicker at that point. But it's just looking at the challenge that government's facing. That it isn't one issue. There's a whole raft of issues, and they're all pretty fundamental as to how you actually get planning and then build a house. And not only that, you're building houses in places where people want to live, want to work, want to socialise, etc. So again, it's not a scattergun effect that says, well, we'll just build houses on land that is available to build. There is a real hierarchy around where developers develop, because they don't just look at the numbers; they're looking at socio-economic background as well. And not surprisingly, people want to live near good transport hubs with good access to good schools, decent countryside and stuff. It's everybody is looking for the same thing.
And it has been becoming increasingly scarce. And that's why, with mandatory housing numbers and things like grey belt, hopefully that's going to unlock some more land that's been rejected in the past, or maybe not even thought about, to be able to come forward. I just think everyone, and I mean, every member of the public needs to accept that it's an inevitable consequence of trying to house all the people that we have in the country, that we are going to have to build on some greenfield.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Guy. I think there is a collective responsibility, isn't there, that people have just got to stand up and realise that, we need to build substantially more houses for a growing population, and they need to be decent houses across a range of values, but in locations that work for, young families, single people. It can't just be that people are cut adrift really in locations, like they used to do in the 70s when they moved people out of London and, put them into strange places in Lincolnshire and stuff. It kind of social engineering doesn't particularly work very well at all. It's got to be something that's based on, where do people want to work, where do they want to live, and to provide people with a decent standard of living. So there's a lot of pressure on it. And we see it in the utility and infrastructure sector within our business as well. Nobody, despite the fact that everyone will agree we need more, gas, water and electricity, and we've got to charge our cars up and all that sort of stuff. No one wants any infrastructure near where they live whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So the whole culture in the UK is possibly one of over consulting with the public in respect of these things. I know other countries, particularly in Europe, do it differently in order to expedite construction of things that are considered to be within the national interest. And really, you can almost look at the housing shortages within that context. It is within the national interest to house people properly in the right places. And the simple truth is, and this isn't just a criticism of this government, it's governments in the past, is we've never hit decent numbers. We've had since the war, we've had a couple of housing booms, but really what we're talking about is that consistent year-on-year delivery of the right houses in the right places. And we're just not there. Are we going to get there?
Are we going to get there? I mean, yes, over time. I think this toolbox is innovative. You could argue whether it's been the money that's being provided is being spent in the right places or not, but it is quite a chunk of money when taken together, and bearing in mind, the overall financial constraints. The house building sector has been, treated relatively well, I think. I just think we can't expect these policies to bear fruit straight away. I don't think we can criticise anyone for the fact that we're short of numbers in year one or possibly two, because it is such a big multifaceted problem, as you said.
Yeah, and I suppose the elephant in the room is the wider UK economy, isn't it? Because the growth figures are exceptionally poor for UK outlook for the next 10 years. As the Chancellor's experiencing at the moment, not hitting any of their key performance indicators around the economy at the moment. Thought to identify savings which aren't coming through in the life of this Parliament. So we're now talking about going back to looking at taxation increases in October. The whole mood music is very difficult. As we know, the housing market fundamentally, really, in truth, is just completely propped up by people's ability to borrow money to buy a house. That's it. If you can't access funds at a reasonable rate, and you might suggest that that's what's going on at the moment in quite a lot of the country, you're not buying a house, you're staying where you are, or you're renting, because, the truth is you have to have access to funds, and that's driven by money markets and the general wider economy. And these plans could, certainly in the life of this Parliament, be dealt a bit of a blow by a no-growth economy that, it is literally just tipping along on the verge of recession. It's not in recession, but it's as close as you can get to it without being in it. Just as a general mood piece, it can't help, really. It just can't. Because at the end of the day, when we think back to sort of, our great ages and the fact that, I remember sort of incredibly cheap mortgages. I can remember incredibly expensive. I can remember sort of, 15%. I can remember 1.5%. And that just has a material impact on particularly first-time buyers, but also families moving up, through the different size houses.
Yeah, of course it affects buyers' appetites. I mean, absolutely. I think it's one of the biggest issues. It's one of the biggest barriers in many ways. We talk about labour shortages and planning officer shortages and everything like that, but it is a really fundamental factor within any market. But if conditions are poor, people have got less money in their pocket or think that they're going to have more taken out, which I think is the point that you're making. That just affects their appetite to go and splurge some money on getting that next house that they want, or even their first house. That has an impact on delivery rates. If people aren't buying, they're not building houses to stand empty.
No, and it's said within the context of the cost of living as well, because that's gone up significantly the last 2 to 3 years. So I think that kind of, people's disposable income levels are, I would probably suggest, decreasing, not increasing in the UK at the moment. That as a context just doesn't help, which at the end of the day, purchase of a house is the largest financial investment that most people in the UK are ever going to make. So it's a pretty key driver in terms of households across the UK. So I think it probably sits there. I think for me, very good. I think I agree with you. I think there's more tools in the locker there for use. I think the investment is good. I think the long-term planning is good. I just think some of it will be probably in the shorter term made more difficult by a poor performing economy. I think thereafter, if you're looking sort of 5 years plus, it'd be great to think that some of these things will start to come through and to make a difference, but I think it's a few years off.
Yeah, I just think that's a good summary. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we've covered that, Gar. Thanks very much. That's all for this episode of the Bruton Knowles Landmark Podcast. A big thank you to Guy Emerson for joining me today, and to you, our listeners, for tuning in. The road to delivering 1.5 million homes is complex, and while the ambition is welcome, it's clear that overcoming entrenched challenges around planning, skills, and delivery capacity will require more than just policy pledges. We'll continue to monitor how things unfold and bring you expert analysis from the people working on the front lines of change. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for future episodes. Thanks for listening. Until next time. Landmark is a podcast produced by independent national chartered surveying firm Bruton Knowles. The firm, first established in 1862, operates throughout the UK from 15 hubs with specialist teams working across all sectors and for a national client base. For more information, you can contact us at Bruton Knowles at edenpr.co.uk or subscribe to our newsletter on LinkedIn. Just search for Landmark Newsletter or follow our social media feeds.